Representative Danny Sterling, and at this time I'll recognize him to get us going again. Representative Sterling.
Thank you very much, Chairman Johns. Glad everybody's able to make it back today. Hopefully we'll get some more rain. We definitely need that. Our first presenter today actually is going to get the opportunity to do double duty. One of our presenters that was originally scheduled for yesterday, we switched out. Rashard Tortorello is on his way to emergency room right now because he is sick. Apparently have run fever or whatever. So anyway, so Mr. Stacy, there he is going to be able to get the opportunity to do double duty today. He's going to do his presentation, and then he'll also go in to what Mr. Tortorello is going to go over his, which is the 4 to 5 counts per hour moment. So we'll definitely give him time to do whatever he does if he needs to do to transition from his presentation to Rashard's, and we'll go from there. So, Derek, whenever you're ready, feel free to either step up to the podium and talk there, or you can one of the desks. Just be sure to introduce yourself and your capacity, and you are welcome to begin.
I appreciate it, and I assume this works the PowerPoint. Can you guys hear me, or does this?
I think a little bit. Yes, I think that's as close as we can get.
Okay, perfect. Well, I want to start out by saying thank you. Thank you for taking your time to do this study and to look at these issues and these projects and give consideration to them from the legislature. I know you guys have a lot of stuff going, but this is important to these residents. Start out, like you said, I would like to introduce myself. First, I want to tell you who I am. More specifically, I'm a resident of East Cleveland County, and I have been my entire life. I grew up there. I was a police officer for 23 years in the city of Norman. Was on the school board in Norman, and then I ran for county commissioner and was elected, and I have performed that job for the last 10 years. But I think most importantly to this discussion is I live in this area. As I said, I grew up in this area. I have family that are going to be impacted directly by these plans, and that includes my brother, my niece, my aunt, and I have a property as well that's going to be impacted directly by this. So this is important to me, and it's obviously a very passionate subject for a lot of people, but I think the fact that we can come together and discuss it and discuss the future of not only the Turnpike system, but this one specifically is important. So that's who I am. I'd now like to go into a little bit about, if I can make this work right here.
Right. You might have to turn
There
it
you
on.
go.
There you go. Oh, there we go. We jumped. Yeah. So I'll tell you a little bit about the people that I've spoke with and some of the concerns that we have. Particularly, I'm going to be speaking from a county perspective, and then, as you mentioned, Councilmember Tortorello is unable to be here, so I'm going to try and go over a few things specifically that he and I discussed that was in his presentation that is of particular interest to the county as well. So I myself and several within the county have spoken with the Central Oklahoma Master Conservancy District for Lake Thunderbird, our schools, and members of public safety who have raised concerns. I have personally spoken with both the police chiefs of Norman, Moore, the fire chiefs of Norman, the emergency managers of Norman and Moore, city council members, the city manager, several people that have numerous concerns and questions about the future of what this is going to do to impact our areas. Specifically, we also have concerns about the watershed water quality, and area wildlife. And I'm sure you're going to hear much more about that, and you've probably heard yesterday about some of that as well. I also had an opportunity to speak with our school superintendents. As you can imagine, there's going to be a huge issue with the disruption of school bus routes during construction, what that's going to do to populations within that area as far as future growth goes, as the schools plan their 5-10-year plans on infrastructure and what they do in that area as well. The construction delays are also going to obviously affect our first responders. And then I'm going to speak to and want to discuss a little bit about the damage that it will occur to existing roadways as a result of that activity. There we go. As you can see by these maps, lakes do not exist in isolation, but they interact as part of a complex ecosystem contained within a watershed. A watershed is the area of land that drains rainfall and streams to a pour point, which in Oklahoma is often a reservoir, just like Lake Thunderbird. Information and data in this PowerPoint comes primarily from the Lake Thunderbird Water Quality 2021 final report submitted to the Central Oklahoma Master Conservancy District by the Oklahoma Water Resource Board on April 29, 2022. I don't know how well you can see this, but what's of particular interest is this is the exact area that we're discussing the construction would occur, and this is the watershed and exactly where those will be draining into Lake Thunderbird. I'm going to get this down. I'm going to find out what I'm pointing at. There we go. All right, so the Lake Thunderbird watershed, that's the map that you're looking at right now, was provided by the City of Norman and shows the proposed route through the watershed. Construction of a turnpike within this watershed and in the proximity to the lake and flood zones are of what's particularly concerning to us. Best practices throughout the construction process is obviously extremely important. I know there's a lot of discussion about exactly what NEPA guidelines will be followed, what are the necessary precautions that have to be taken on government land, on state land, on land that is not covered under what we would typically, when we're building roads and bridges, consider necessary for NEPA. So those are of particular concern to us. This map shows the current land use in the watershed. The red is the highest density of land use affecting the watershed with pollutants. Changing the land use to increase traffic and the potential for a commercial corridor so close to the lake increases the levels of pollution that must be mitigated. If you look where the red's at right now, imagine the overlay of that turnpike and what that will do to those density populations in those areas as they grow closer and closer to Lake Thunderbird. Lake Thunderbird provides drinking water for Del City, Midwest City, and Norman, serving more than 200,000 people according to census population data. Land use in the watershed are important for determining potential sources of nutrients, sediment, and other forms of pollution. Lake Thunderbird is listed in the latest Oklahoma Integrated Water Quality Report as impaired due to low dissolved oxygen, which affects fish and aquatic life. So of particular concern to me when I look at this is our lake is already considered at a poor quality. All of the lakes, any lake, has a lifespan. And Lake Thunderbird's lifespan is decreasing rapidly due to the fact that it is a poor quality lake at this time. I think what's most concerned to me and most of the residents in that area is what will a turnpike like this do? What will an increase in the density and population around and the pollutants that go into the lake do to that low, what will it do to the low quality rating that Lake Thunderbird already has? Excessive turbidity, which is essentially sediment, which also carries other pollutants, and excessive chlorophyll, which can create algae bloom, which is toxic, is a major concern already within Lake Thunderbird. The red oval indicates an area of specific concern near Rock Creek and Alameda Drive interchange, the route's proximity to the lake, FEMA flood zones, and through 2 natural wetlands. FEMA's designation indicates an enhanced need for the mitigation during construction to prevent sediment from carrying contaminants into the already impaired lake water. The areas that are outlined that are the wetlands are what's considered the kidneys of the lake and filters that as it comes into it. Obviously as well, it's already impaired and we're already seeing issues with it. So of specific concern as we look at a major interchange being proposed in that area is what will we do to mitigate and assist with those wetland areas in that specific point. The proposed turnpike also crosses wetlands near Robinson Street and a forested shrub wetland further south in the Dave Blue Creek area, as identified by the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. I grew up fishing on that Dave Blue Creek area right there. According to the OWRB, wetlands, as I said, are the kidneys of the landscape, acting as natural filters by decreasing contaminant concentrations in the water column. It's important that OTA reaches out to COMCD on wetlands mitigation if this route continues to move forward. ODOT and the City of Norman have heavily invested in a 10-foot wide multimodal concrete path along the north side of East Highway 9. Construction began March 5th, 2018, with the intent to connect urban Norman to Lake Thunderbird State Park. Phase 1 runs from 24th Avenue to 36th Avenue Southeast along the highway at a cost of approximately $700,000, 80% of which was grant money. Phase 2 extended to 48th Avenue Southeast with a $600,000 grant share. Grant applications to fund the next 2 miles to 72nd Avenue are currently under consideration by ODOT with long-range plans to continue the path 5 additional miles beyond that to reach the lake and tie into trails at Clear Bay. One of our questions and the communication we would like to have with OTA is what would the proposed turnpike, which crosses this affected area, do to connect this trail, and if so, how will OTA mitigate and bring all of this together? Robin Hill and Lakeview School bus routes are within the construction area of the proposed turnpike. In particular, Lakeview Elementary is concerned that their school population will be affected by the loss of homes should the turnpike move forward with its current route. Other concerns are a disruption of bus routes from road closures and the need for creating different routes and bus stops to ensure the safety of our school children. Schools would incur expenses for time and for the staffing needed to electronically communicate with bus drivers and affected families. As I spoke to both our emergency service personnel and to our schools, the ability to communicate and have a system in place with OTA so that we can get immediate updates on information as construction goes is absolutely paramount. As you can imagine, for emergency services, as they pull up on their CAD computer-aided dispatch systems, having the absolute best and fastest routes and knowing that there are not any disruptions or alternate routes is imperative when responding to emergencies. It's just as important when we're going to pick up kids along a bus route on a cold morning. One of the most immediate concerns by first responders, as I discussed, is whether the roadway would be open during construction. Emergency responders want map access points during and following construction. They need effective dates for road closures and advance time to route detours. They also need to know the gates or other barriers following construction. They want free access to the turnpike to facilitate faster response times. And another discussion that I had was with the emergency services in reference to our emergency warning systems or tornado sirens in the area. As you know, it's going to go through, and the proposed route will take out numerous of our tornado sirens that are currently in place. So the question is, will other property or land be provided for that? Will it be up to the city and the county to find other places for that and move those sirens? As is common, as we've discussed before, one of the major concerns to the county is the damage to existing roadways as this begins and as a process like this begins to take place. As many of you know, one of our biggest problems on our asphalt county road system is the large truck traffic, particularly during the summer. The weight of the vehicles causes major damage to our roadways. There's no doubt that this plan is going to cause excessive damage to our road system as well in East Cleveland County. So I think the ability to communicate ahead of time of what will be done to address and mitigate those concerns for both the county and the city as this construction takes place is very important as well. In conclusion, I want to tell you that I think communication is probably the biggest concern for me. I think that communication, as I can tell you even from my position, and as you know as representatives, is the most important thing, and that's what our citizens want. And the ability for us to work closely together as government agencies, for the ability for us to plan for all these things that I've discussed and set down and have those discussions before a project like this starts is absolutely paramount. And so, if nothing else, my goal and my hope is that we have raised the awareness that we want that communication, that we want to have the ability to sit down and have input not only into the plans but into the decisions of OTA moving forward. And it's my feeling that that has not taken place to this point. And so I truly hope that we can raise that awareness and that we can, if not start those communications now, but that we can have those in the future. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll try and go through again part of Councilmember Tortorella's, but I'll be happy to take any questions, or we can save them for later if you'd like.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Stacy. We appreciate that. Representatives, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, a big part of your job is building roads. And you know it's a lot easier to shut a road down and really build it well the first time without people being in your way. And yes, it makes a lot of trouble for the people going around, but it's much faster, much more efficient. So you understand that better than most citizens that are going to come and talk about this. So would you talk to me about the idea, from your viewpoint, of really giving them the opportunity to shut things down and still make accommodations? I'm not saying that there won't be, but getting this done quickly. And also, we saw some projections yesterday about, or some arguments for being made about going on the other side of the lake, especially in this. So I'd just like to hear your thoughts on both those things about how, if you were building it, what would you be doing?
Communication, absolutely, and I think that's absolutely paramount, as I said earlier. Whenever I'm going to do a road project, and you know this as well with your husband's job, you have to communicate with the citizens. And my foreman knows just about every person that lives in East Cleveland County. And we go door to door and talk to people. We communicate about what the plans are, what we're going to do on the project, what the alternate routes are going to be, how long they'll be shut down. We try and communicate through the process so that people know, listen, this is the delays that may occur, or this is where we may be ahead of schedule. But communication is absolutely the most important. But I think that communication goes further than once we've decided that project and we've started it. Getting the input from the people that know, live, part of that area is so important. I'm not saying that I personally could have changed the route, but I think I know and have the ability to speak for the residents in that area to say, listen, this is a huge concern. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this alternative route? Have you looked at this? And I'm not saying, again, that I may have all the answers, but it's important that you talk to the people, the council members, the county commissioners, the superintendents, the police departments, and get input on them of what their concerns are, and really try and determine ahead of time of how you can mitigate those issues and how you can address even the path, the direction, where that turnpike's going to go before the plans are made.
Thank you. But you will agree, do you see the need for a turnpike to go through? And I'm sorry, I know you're an elected official, not trying to put you on the spot, but you are boots on the ground. And you know that that town, your community, your county is the third largest in the state. So you see there's going to be growth. Do you believe that we need a turnpike in that area? Somewhere, I'm not saying this route. I'm saying, do you understand and agree with the need for turnpikes?
I personally have not seen the numbers to justify the turnpike at this point, no. Could a turnpike of some type be an advantage in another route? I believe so. And I believe, again, there's alternative routes that we could look at, even possibly further east. I can tell you for probably the last 20 years living and growing up in that area, it was my understanding that in the future we were going to look at a turnpike at around 156th or further east. I don't think anybody envisioned up until it was announced that it was going to be where it is. So I do not, to answer your question directly, I don't know that I've been convinced that the numbers are there that we have to have a turnpike. But if there does have to be a turnpike, I think consideration as to where it should go should be taken into account with all of the people in that area.
You know that my district and where I live is the fourth largest county, and we have the fastest growing part of the turnpike in the state.
Yep.
With the 10%, now we were told yesterday, it's 10% growth per year. So I appreciate you representing your constituents. I appreciate you saying that because that's difficult for you. It's not a win-win of you saying anything. Makes it more difficult to me, but I appreciate that. But I do encourage everyone, and you as well, to look at what has happened because we have the growth in the area where I live. We have access to commerce where we cannot get a road built or widened with shoulders. They're working on it, I know, but it's still a problem. And if we did not have the turnpike, we would not be able to get around in the area that I live. And so, not that I'm advocating for them, I'm trying to be very open-minded and addressing where you are, but I'm encouraging all to see what's happening at the other parts where the state's growing the fastest. And you guys are even larger than we are.
We are, and you guys are growing very fast, and you're right, it's not a win situation for me either way. I work with these guys every day, and we do projects together. We do some really good stuff. We're doing an incredible project out on the east side of Cleveland County right now that's going to provide access for residents that they never had before, that's really going to improve their lives. So I'm not saying that construction's bad. I'm not saying that the roadways are bad. What I'm saying is communication is absolutely imperative when we make decisions like these.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Starkey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I'm going to just coattail off what y'all were, you and Representative Crosswhite-Header were discussing about your involvement from your capacity, your job. And you mentioned communications because that's my first question. So along those guidelines, what conversations with the OTA have you had, and especially in reference to the projected path that we're looking at right now?
So I learned about this at the same time as everybody else did, the public. I can tell you it's kind of like some of those big events in your life. I know exactly where I was and what I was doing when I got the phone call that, hey, have you seen the path of where this turnpike's going? And I pulled it up. We drove back. It was me and my deputy commissioner drove back. We pulled it up on the computer. We looked at it, and as I'm looking at it, I get the next phone call from my brother, and he says, hey, did you see this thing's going right through my living room? I said, I had no clue. So as far as communication ahead of time as to where this was going to go and what it was going to impact, I was as surprised as everybody else.
Okay, so with that being said, have you had any discussions with other county commissioners that have been affected by turnpike construction in their areas and maybe the procedures that
I have.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I have. So I brought it up at one of our ACO meetings, and I discussed it. I would say for the most part, and I can't paint a complete broad stroke because I didn't talk to all the commissioners. For the most of them, they said that communication could be much better on these proposed turnpikes, and as OTA moved forward with their plans, that they weren't communicated with ahead of time, and that communication could be better. Now, are there some commissioners that would view it differently? I'm sure that there are a few out there, but I would say for the most part, and several of them came up to me after I brought up the discussion and said, yeah, we've had the same issues, same concerns as turnpikes have gone in our counties as well.
Okay, along those same lines, moving forward, whether this turnpike, future turnpikes, whatever the case may be, do you feel like that you and other county commissioners need to have more input at the onset of these construction projects as they begin in their infancy?
100%. You'll hear me quite often say that I believe county government is the closest government to the people. We are, as you said earlier, the boots on the ground. We're out there. We build the roads. We drive the roads. We fix the potholes. We mow the bar ditches. We talk to our constituents on a regular basis. If you want some type of government official entity that communicates with the public on a regular basis, that can be their voice, that can speak with you, I think county commissioners are the ones to do that.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Just go ahead and give us the information that you were going to give for Mr. Poe.
You bet. Do we have that PowerPoint to pull up? Thank you.
Jerry, I think you need to turn on the clicker is it on the side? Is it green?
So somebody else was clicking that.
Somebody else is clicking, right? Yeah. So just so you know. We got you covered.
Not only are you good, but I feel really dumb now.
Commissioner, don't worry, they take care of us all the time. They know what they're doing.
I can talk louder, I have a cough voice. Okay, that's right. Yes, sir. All right, so obviously I'm not going to be near as eloquent as Councilmember Tortorella would be on his own presentation here, but I'm going to take this through and I'm going to hit a few of the high points that I know he and I specifically discussed. He did call me yesterday, and yeah, I would say keep him in your prayers because he's not doing well right now, so we need to be thinking about him. So this is a little bit about him, so you can read through this. He's very active in East Norman and his ward, and he's been very active with people in that area in bringing their concerns forth on this project. So, rural Norman should not be sacrificed to the toll road gods without a fight to save the region's major source of drinking water and a way of life. I would tell you that I hear as well one of the major concerns, probably the two major concerns, is number one, is what is this going to do to affect our drinking water, which I discussed in my presentation, and two is their way of life. You and I both raise cattle, and people grew up or people moved out to this area or grew up in a family in this area because that's the way of life that they want, and that's what they appreciate. They moved there for that reason, and what is this going to do to that way of life? And that's the concern for people. I can tell you that I got a call from a couple of elderly ladies, and I would say they were their late 80s, that raised llamas out there. And their question was, what do we do? It's going to come right through, just like they're right down the street from my brother. It's going to take out their house, their property. At their age, they said, how do we move an operation like this? How do we move, how do we bring people in? How do I find another farm where I can live the life that I'm used to and raise llamas like I am? So that's a major concern for people. Key issues. From Rashard's point of view, again, just like I discussed a little bit, his is keeping the municipality in the dark with no warning of a drastic change was coming, contaminating Norman's two major sources of drinking water, negative impact to Norman's land use, stormwater, and transportation master plans, which is a really big deal. So as they create these master plans, that's what they project for future growth. And obviously this is going to have an incredible impact on that. So just like I talked about future plans for the schools for infrastructure, it's just as big a deal for the cities as they continue as well. The reality of a mass exodus of tax-paying constituents with no place to go, and then unintended consequences. Again, and I'm going to read, so I don't have firsthand on a lot of this. From their perspective, council was shocked. They had zero knowledge or consultation onto it. They're concerned about the impact to Lake Thunderbird. They're concerned about what they're doing to obligate future councils and commissions. I discussed a little bit about what it's going to do to the first responders and to the school districts, and then reimbursement for damages, and then communication. Again, of major concern is what it does to jeopardize our drinking water. I think I've gone over this pretty well in detail, but there's no doubt that the Garber-Wellington aquifer is going to be affected, and what are we going to do to mitigate that and address those issues? So I appreciate the fact that OTA has said that that is a concern to them, but I would say the citizens want more than a concern. They want to see the plan, and they want to know what it's going to do to keep our water safe. Negative impact to Norman's land use, stormwater, and transportation plans. The city's on hold until the legalities of the Turnpike is settled. So as I understand, they're in the midst right now of updating their master plan. And again, that information and that communication is absolutely paramount as they make plans for the future of that side of their city as well. An exodus of citizens. So as this turnpike goes through, there's no doubt that it's going to displace many of the citizens of City of Norman and Cleveland County. So one of the concerns right now is the housing shortage. I spoke to an individual that happens to be on our fair board, and it's going to go through and take out his residents as well. And I asked him, I said, so have you looked at where you're going to go or where you're going to move to? And he has a large farm, has a milking operation, quite a bit of stuff. And he said, I got to move outside the county. I got to move. It's several counties away. He's already looked at the property. And he said, you know, I love Cleveland County. I love being on the fair board. I love what we do. But I can't find a place anywhere close that is able to accommodate what I have that they're going to displace. Doing nothing is not an option, that we must protect, and we must do something to address the concerns for the citizens. They're fighting because Norman's remaining rural areas are worth more than the sum of their parts. And again, that's the fact that people live there for a reason, and they enjoy that way of life, and they move there because that's what they want. And this is going to turn all of that upside down. So I don't see specifically the impact. It didn't have it on this presentation. But the ad valorem impact is enormous. And what it's going to do as all that property, as the OTA goes through, is going to affect dollars that go directly to our schools, our libraries, our county government, our technology center. Those are dollars that we are going to lose, and that's going to be tough to replace. And yes, in time it may, and we've seen turnpikes where communities have built around the turnpikes, but as you know, the future's not looking really good for finances. I think we've had several good years here, but that's a major concern to government entities, is what is the next few years going to look like? And as we take away some of those resources and we take away some of that funding, that's a concern. So, any questions on his? I'm happy to do what I can to. I kind of like this. I can speak for the City of Norman, so bring them on.
Thank you for that. Thank you for presenting his information to us. We appreciate it. Representatives, any questions? Go right ahead.
Along that vein, you know, I kind of see there's a, call it a pattern, but a thing that we definitely have some people that have concerns in that area, obviously. And like I say, I know a lot of born and raised Noble. I know I'm very familiar with that area, so I understand some of these concerns. But you said you can speak, I'm glad you said that last statement. I can kind of speak for the City of Norman. Have you and the councilman had any conversations about those who, either on the council or the area citizens, that are in favor of this?
Yes, I specifically have talked to some people. So I think of directly some of the people that are most in favor is the east-west connection to the Tri-City area. I think some of those that are looking at the economics of development on the west side of Norman and from I-35 west, I think are encouraged about what that could do to open up more economic development in that area.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Along those same guidelines, yes, there are some people I understand that, you know, are wanting definitely to have that come in for various things such as that. But do you feel like that the councilman, did he ever allude to you any thoughts about how, and much involvement that the council and the municipalities had in this project moving forward.
So, and that's what he had on the first of his presentation, is I think they were as surprised as we were on the actual location of the Turnpike. And so the discussions and the input to determine what that would be or where it would be, I don't think that they had the that information or that opportunity ahead of time, just like county commissioners.
So I know you can't speak for him, but for yourself, or maybe you can, do you have any suggestions that maybe you haven't already offered up that you think that would be helpful in moving forward with this project as well as others from their standpoint, the OTA that is?
Absolutely. I don't know what their normal process is on OTA side, because I haven't dealt with a turnpike before. I can tell you some of the processes that are in place on the ODOT side that are very helpful in the pre-planning meetings, our ability to communicate ahead of time, to sit down, to have those discussions. I think I don't like meetings for meeting's sake, and I'm sure you guys don't either. That something this important, something of this magnitude, I think absolutely the more that we can communicate, the more that we can sit down ahead of time, the more that we can express their concerns. And I'm not going to say, I'll tell you the first, and you know well as an elected official, you're not going to make everybody happy, and you never are. But the ability to listen to those concerns and to address those concerns means more than you can imagine to people. And when they don't believe they've been heard, and they don't believe that anybody's taken their concerns into an account, then that's when people are mad, that's when they're frustrated. And again, I'm not going to make everybody happy, and I haven't. But I'll absolutely return every phone call and talk to every constituent to find out what the issues are.
Thank you again, Mr. Stacy. We appreciate your time and appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Representative Sturdy, you recognized?
Thank you again, Commissioner. At this time, we'll move to our next presenter, Ms. Carla Denton. We are doing great on time, Ms. Denton, so don't feel rushed.
Thank you, Representative Sterling, for having me here today. Hello, my name is Carla Denton, and I'm a veterinarian in Norman. I'm here today because as a veterinarian, I often represent those without a voice. Recently, I've had clients coming in extremely depressed and shattered because they will lose their homes by eminent domain for this turnpike. I cannot stand idly by and watch them suffer. I'm here to help convey their story and explain why this location is ill-suited for a turnpike. I hope this makes you appreciate that there are more important things in life than money. Helps if it's on.
So she's gonna can you give her the? I just clicked that.
You're just trying to make me feel better.
It's 16 years since I've done any type of presentation.
Oh, wow.
So let me tell you a little bit about me. I grew up split between downtown Dallas, which is a very urban area, and St. Croix, USVI in the Caribbean. I ended up in Oklahoma after I met a smooth-talking guy who promised if I moved to Oklahoma, he would get me a ranch. Because, of course, everyone in Oklahoma has a ranch. We looked at about 70 properties over 3 years before we settled in East Norman. Finding a property that we could afford for my horses on more than 10 acres and within 30 minutes of downtown Oklahoma City where he worked was very difficult. I cannot express how unique the rural properties of East Norman are. Nowhere else in the country can you live in such a peaceful location yet be so close to a major metropolitan area. You cannot replace these homes. Let me introduce you to some of the pets I see. Let's start with Flash. Flash lives south of Alameda in Norman. His family has lived on that property since the land run. This is Dot. She lives in a neighborhood and her home will be taken. Her dad's on oxygen and they have no idea where they will go. Her mom is now taking antidepressants because of the stress due to the proposed turnpike. This is Chester. He was a barn cat that became a house cat. His mom's passion is her horses, and the turnpike will take her house and her barn. This is Annie. Her family has been farming between Franklin and Indian Hills for generations. 3 of their 4 properties might be taken. They significantly impact the beef and hay market, and I buy my hay from them. This is Rumble. His dad's developed dementia, and his mom is completely overwhelmed by the thought of moving. Their adult children live near them. This area has a natural beauty unique from anywhere else. The red clay dirt of Norman was used to create Franco pottery. There is an abundant variety of plant life. There are morel mushrooms. There's camping, the famous horse trails at Lake Thunderbird, wildlife like snapping turtles, wild turkeys, deer, and bald eagles, which I've never seen until I moved to Norman. Where that eagle is sitting is right in the middle of the proposed turnpike. There are also fossils and rose rocks. It's important to know, however, about this area that this area floods. The Lake Thunderbird watershed and drainage basins funnel water into this entire area. This is the drinking water for Norman, Midwest City, and Dell City. Growth has been restricted in this area specifically to protect our water source. The proposed turnpike will cut this area into 3 pieces. Again, the blue outline is where we don't want to build. It will be dissected if this turnpike is to go through. This is a picture of our driveway when it rains. Because we're between Draper Lake and Lake Thunderbird, this is one example of where the water naturally flows. It gets soggy for approximately 1/4 of a mile in just this area alone. I'm going to play this video, maybe. Nope. Yes, click that. Nope.
Is there a link to it anywhere?
There is not.
It may not play or it's not.
Oh no. That video is important. That'll work. Maybe click it there. Perfect. Thank you so much. So, I actually took this video in an effort to get a culvert put under the road. Where I'm standing is the city of Norman. Where the water is flowing to is the city of Moore. And where the water is flowing from across the street is Oklahoma City. Now, of course, government politics. We can't get anything accomplished to fix this problem and get a culvert put in. But this is an example of the Lake Thunderbird watershed and drainage basins that funnel the water into this entire area. To reiterate, this area supplies the drinking water for Norman, Midwest City, and Dell City. That is approximately 200,000 people and counting. Construction of the roadway and roadway traffic from the turnpike will cause negligible pollution to our drinking water through the roadway chemicals such as salting frozen roads and motor vehicle emissions. Construction and roadway traffic will likely cause additional pollution to contaminate Thunderbird further, thus degrading the drinking water quality. You already took people's homes to build Lake Thunderbird for the purpose of supplying clean drinking water to the people. To protect this water source and to prevent further expansion, the City of Norman instituted zoning laws to prevent land from being divided into less than 10 or 20 acre tracts and restricting those to single family units. If we keep building in the watershed, or worse, add subdivision housing communities in these areas prone to flooding, it will cause immeasurable damage to the source of clean drinking water, which is Lake Thunderbird, that approximately 200,000 Oklahoma citizens rely on each and every day. Okay, try it again. I can click through. Maybe. These are such cute dogs. That's the only video I've got, so we should have some to say. Again, this specific area is not considered a flood zone. That right there. This specific event pictured cost over $100,000 in damage to our neighbor's house. And it prompted them to install a berm to prevent future flooding and water issues. Flood insurance is not required on that property yet. It floods. Here's the same area. Not flooded. Most of the area along Indian Hills Road where the proposed turnpike will be built looks like this when it rains. It stays swampy most of the year and has great grass. When it rains and floods, which is every spring, the roads are impassable. It is going to be a colossal mess to divert all this water to prevent the turnpike from being washed out if it's even possible. Again, it's the same area. It's a little bit different angle, but it's the same area, not flooded. Earlier this month, I went to Missouri via the Kansas Turnpike. And one thing that I noted as I drove through Kansas was that once you get on the turnpike, you do not stop in the towns that you pass because it costs money to get off and on. There will be no benefit in Norman if the turnpike is put in. Make no mistake, this will completely bypass the city of Norman and the city of Moore. The government can do its double talk about only taking 200 homes. I personally counted 665 homes using Google and Access Oklahoma. The 2020 census indicated that there are an average of 2.57 people per home in the state of Oklahoma. So that would mean at least 1,709 people would be displaced for the proposed turnpike. And I say at least because most people that live in the country have larger homes or larger families. So where do you expect these people to go with all the animals that they have? Most of the homes that I looked at on Google were 10, 20 acres, and many had barns. I didn't even count the businesses. The market for horse properties with barns and fencing is extremely difficult, even in a good market. These people are unlikely to find comparable homes and properties anywhere in the metro area at any price. And this will certainly make things worse for many Oklahomans. ODOT has already used eminent domain to take land along Highway 9. In fact, a friend of mine lost 8 acres of his property due to that expansion. You can say that this particular route selected is needed because it cuts 12 miles out. But in fact, the route chosen is longer than going around the lake. Not that I approve of any turnpike, but the connection from the Kickapoo Turnpike to Highway 9 would be 10 miles on the dot, rather than the 25 to 30 miles proposed. So if you say it's to prevent home loss, you're a big fat liar. Eminent domain is un-American. To work so hard for your home, to pay taxes on your home, and then for it to be seized by the government is unconscionable. I am very disappointed that the current administration would deem that acceptable. These properties are beautiful and unique, and where you'd want to raise your family. It is country life, but it is not just farmland. A turnpike will affect generations. Is that what we want? It is important to respect the freedom of property ownership and to prevent colossal contamination of a very valued natural resource. This is not okay, and this is not the right thing to do. In school, they taught us that they pitched us this American dream, and once you achieve it, an eminent domain kicks in and they take it all away. Representative Sterling, thank you for this opportunity to help me represent my clients, my neighbors, and my friends. I want to leave you all with one word. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions? Representative Sterling, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation, Carla. Some nice, pretty pictures of those pets. I appreciate that. As far as you were familiar with the community meetings that ODOT orchestrated, I think they had 4 or 5 more, over, et cetera. Are you aware, do you remember those meetings that they had at various?
For ODOT, no, I did not.
OTA, I'm sorry.
I went to most of the OTA.
Okay,
ones.
all right.
I didn't go to the first one that was the initial one at the church because of COVID.
Okay. So I guess my question is, I was told by OTA that those meetings were basically to inform people what the current plans are, what the proposed route is, what options they have, so forth, et cetera, et cetera. So from your experience from attending those meetings, what was your takeaway? Was that accomplished? Or I guess just overall, you just kind of speak to your view of your experience there.
So when I went in, it was, hey, this is where the route is. Let us know if you have any questions. So we went up to the tables. There were a lot of people there. You guys should all know where I live because I drew where I live on the map. I am not in the direct path. But they said this is where it's going to go and this is where it has to go. And there was nothing else that was told to us.
Did you happen to witness anybody asking, okay, if you do buy my property or ultimately we agree upon a price, so forth, what happens next? Did you hear those conversations or?
No,
Sure.
what they say is that they're going to give you whatever fair market value is as deemed by an appraiser. But that doesn't really count because you can't just go and buy another 20 acres or, you know, in that area. I mean, you could move to Stroud and commute, but we want to live in Norman. That's the purpose of buying in the city of Norman or in this area. You can't just go and get another property. And so it makes things a little bit more complicated in terms of an appraisal. And just the announcement of a proposed turnpike plummets those property values because who's to say what it's worth now that you can't do anything with it, you can't sell it because they're your only able buyers. A lot of times what seems to happen, and I'm saying this from experience that I've seen with eminent domain, is they go in and they say, okay, well, we're going to buy your property for this because this formula, and if you don't agree, then they're going to take you to court, which is what's happened with the kickapoo, which has been an absolute nightmare for a lot of people. You know, this kills people. Like, people will die over this. Like, these clients that I have, there's a real possibility that they'll die over the stress of this. And that's sad. But you can't just go and expect, you know, like, let's say it's on the tax rolls for one amount. Go try to find something else. The next property that is similar to ours and is not even close to ours is for sale for $3.3 million. I can't find another property like ours. Like, thank God ours isn't being taken. But to those that are losing their barns and their homes, that barn, I mean, this is where she always wanted to be. That's sad. And you can't just replace that. There's nowhere else. It doesn't matter how much money they get, because you can't, this lady has to commute to Oklahoma City, so does her husband. You can't just go and find that for sale. It's not there.
One additional thing I want to your point before I forget.
I'm sorry.
No, you mentioned that, I'm a little confused, I guess. You said that the property is 3.3, what was that, 3.3 million, whatever it
3.3
was.
million. Yeah, it's like 3.2 or 3.3
But if I understood you correctly also, and I'm just for clarification, that the property values are plummeting. Have you known anybody that's tried to sell or tried to buy in that area, or, you know, any experiences you, and maybe you don't,
Yeah.
but I'm just curious if you do.
Actually, there is a property, it'll take too long to flip through slides. There is a property that I know that is for sale, that it's my understanding the OTA is getting. She's been going through chemo. She was not planning on selling the property. She was going to let her children inherit it. It's 40 acres. And she, because of the stress and her chemo, she basically just gave up because she's dying and she can't handle the stress, and so she put it up for sale and they're taking it. And it was probably, so property was selling for $20,000 an acre, and she's selling it for, I think, less than $10,000 an acre. So it's not.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the presentation. Thank you. Representative Sterling.
Thank you, Carl, again, appreciate your presentation and your insight on this. Okay, at this point in time, we're moving really good. We're going to go ahead and take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back with the rest of our study. Thank you.
So that'll be about 10:20. Okay, we'll resume our interim study. And so, Representative Sterling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our next speaker will be Whitney Malika, and hopefully I did not butcher that name. And she will be our final presenter before we hear back from the OTA. Go ahead.
All right, well, thank you very much, Representative Sterling, for letting me speak today. And, you know, I've been attending these OTA meetings and these ODOT meetings, and they're super boring, and I don't see any of these gentlemen and, you know, ladies over here as enemies. I see them as people, just like my family members. I'm sure you guys love football and drink beer and all the things that people in Oklahoma do. And I kind of feel bad for all of the bad publicity and the scrutiny that you're getting, because it's probably not very fun if you've just been doing the job for so long. In 1961, there was a reporter from the New Yorker named Hannah Arendt that went to observe some of the Nazi trials. And when she came back, she said that the most surprising thing about it was how terrifyingly normal the people who were on the trial seemed. And she wrote about it as the banality of evil. And I've heard that the only thing that lasts longer than a fight with the road is the bitterness that's left behind in the people who are forced to leave. My name is Whitney Mollica. I grew up in Moore, Oklahoma, and I love Oklahoma. I was never that kid that was gonna grow up and leave. I don't want to leave my house. I live a mile from my parents, and I'll be that way forever. I'll make sure I do. But I love this state. The weather's extreme. The schools are kind of pitiful, but the people are real. They're genuine, and the people make me feel like I'm at home. When I was growing up, I always wanted to be a lawyer. And when I found out that there was no college fund set aside by my parents, I had to take the ACT 6 times to get a high enough score to be eligible for an almost full ride for Oklahoma City University. I graduated in 2012 with a bachelor's degree in political science with an emphasis of studying terrorism. Then I was accepted into the legal program at the University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma City University. Similar to my experience when I was applying for college the first time, I decided to go to OCU because they were going to offer me another almost free ride. And so I entered law school just full of hope and excitement. And I'll be honest, when I left, I was completely distraught. When I was in law school, some of the professors talked about normal, everyday people like they were different. I had one professor who took it so far as to call laypersons muggles. And then we started studying cases like Kilo and just about any product liability case you can think of, and it just made me question, what am I doing here? I thought that people went to law school to become upholders of the Constitution and to protect personal rights. But it turns out that a lot of people go and they end up working for corporations who value shareholders over everyday people. In my humble opinion, the legal system of our country doesn't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat or if you're black or white. It's all about how much money you have. And for me personally, I was too soft for that, so I left. Now I work with people who are retiring and who are on Medicare and Social Security. I sell various insurance products. Some of those include municipal bonds. And I can tell you guys that most people don't understand insurance or bonds. If they trust the person who's selling it, they're going to take the product. And I'm going to grab my water, sorry. So, my home is not currently in the path, but I grew up on Indian Hills Road. This map right here is a map from freewayfighters.org. There is a movement going on in our nation that relates to highway planning. Because for many years, there was a white, male-dominated road planning system that was used to blight and relocate people who were unwanted from communities. There's a little red circle over Oklahoma, that's PIKE off OTA. There's also a green circle over Oklahoma in the top right corner. And that's where people in Tulsa are trying to get a highway removed to reconnect what used to be Greenwood. This year, the United States Department of Transportation has inaugurated the Reconnecting Communities program. It was passed by Congress as a part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's a first-of-its-kind discretionary grant program that is intended to heal the harms that were caused by highways. So this is not just something that we have problems with in Oklahoma. It's nationwide. The top property, that's my family's property. If you live near there, you see the fake cop car with the fake dummy in it, and there's some of the people in this room that know what I'm talking about. I guess my grandma thought she had Russian diamonds or something that people were gonna come after, so we have the fake cop car. But anyways, that property right now is for sale. My grandfather purchased it in 2001. It was called a dollar pond back then. It was a total wreck. There was even a tractor in the middle of the pond that someone just got mad and drove into it. And so my grandfather died prematurely, shortly after this property was completed. And then money has just kind of torn my family apart since then. So my grandmother passed away last year, and it was finally appropriate for my dad to sell the property. He's retiring. He's got degenerative disc disease. He's sick of mowing 80 acres every day, or once a week, whatever. And so the day they got an offer on this property was February 22nd. And of course, that offer was reneged. So my stepmother called whatever, OTA, Access, Poe, whoever she talked to, and said, hey, we'll sell. Please buy it. But instead, the neighborhood across the street, which is a lower income neighborhood called Blue Lakes, that's what's going to get taken. And my husband is a 100% disabled veteran. He was a combat medic in Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. He was also at Ground Zero following 9/11, cleaning up dead bodies. While he was there, he found out that a girl he knew from high school was among the dead. I respect him, and I honor him for all of his sacrifices that he made. But I will be honest with you, if I had a son in today's world, I would beg him not to join the Army. This is a primary source of history. During Sandridge's interim study, there was some mention of the history of the OTA and how important it is to know where we came from. I believe Joey Kelly said that. There was also talk about how important it is for local Oklahoma businesses to be involved with infrastructure development. This article is from 1950, and it tells us that in 1947, an engineering firm out of Kansas and New York, Howard, Needles, Tammet, and Bergendorf, now known as HNTB, brought the toll road dream to Oklahoma City's Chamber of Commerce. Their services were unsolicited. February 22nd of 1947, which is kind of an ironic date, the Governor Roy Turner, a newspaper publisher, E.K. Gaylord, and a merchant from Tulsa met and discussed the governor drafting legislation to create a toll road from Oklahoma City to Tulsa. This was a solution to the everlasting problem we have in Oklahoma, that the state doesn't have enough funds for highways. The plan was to build a road which would pay for itself out of tolls. It was mapped as an airline road, the shortest possible connecting distance between two cities without regard to the towns that were going to be passed. Of course, this sparked controversy. But legislation passed by one vote to receive the required majority, and studies commenced to determine how long it would take to pay off the roads. The first firm that was hired, Cloverdale and Colpit, did not produce the results that the authority wanted, and so they hired a new firm out of Detroit, DeLue, Cather and Company. There were people who opposed the toll road dream, and they were happy to name the first turnpike after Governor Turner so he could take the blame. But the people who were for the toll road also liked that name because they wanted to honor the governor for his credit and his support. And so the ribbon was cut, and the first board of the OTA was formed. Governor Turner was a veteran of the Army, a real estate dealer, and an oil man. The rest of the board consisted of a livestock operator, a newspaper publisher, and a banker. No engineers. When it was time for the bonds to be sold to begin building, the Lincoln County Board of Commissioners, the Chandler School Board, and 40 individuals sought an injunction against the sale of the bonds. It's kind of like 51st dates with the OTA here in Oklahoma. We keep letting this happen, and we keep forgetting about the people who get taken in the meantime or get displaced. So the toll road project faced controversy for years, and it even made its way to the Oklahoma Supreme Court. In 1950, the Oklahoma Supreme Court authorized the sale of the bonds. 3 of the 6 justices that enacted or established this case law that the OTA's lawyers still rely on today were either imprisoned, impeached, or indicted for taking bribes. But once the bonds were sold, Harry E. Bailey left his job at ODOT and began to serve as the general manager of OTA. This is what I would like to call the beginning of the everlasting revolving door, which is now even worse because people like DavidStreb go from working for the state of Oklahoma's transportation to working for Poe And Associates. I believe someone else's son in this room also works for them. So early in the 1950s, opponents of the toll roads formed the Oklahoma Free Roads Association. Members who held positions such as Ralph Matthews, who's mentioned in the top right corner. Matthews worked for the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority, and when he joined the Oklahoma Free Roads Association, he was fired by the governor. This is the wheel that won't stop turning. Whoever's governor gets to do whatever they want with these roads. We get it, build the roads, but go build them somewhere else. I have empathy for you gentlemen, because if you did stand up, if you did say, no, wait, stop, which has been done before by people like Volpe from Boston. If you did that, you'd probably get fired and then blackballed by an industry. So I empathize. I hope that you're taking good care of yourselves because I'm sure you're in a stressful position. While all of this disputing about whether or not we were going to have toll roads was going on, Route 66 was in desperate need of repair. And think about what time frame we're talking about. We're talking about the 1950s and the 1960s. If you weren't a white Protestant person in Oklahoma, it probably wasn't very fun. They used to say that there were coffin curves on Route 66. So imagine if you're being chased out of town. I hope you knew where those coffin curves were. So we're talking about a time before Brown v. Board of Education and before Claire Looper's sit-in at the Cat's Diner. We're talking about a time before this happened, before Claire Looper stood with the underpaid sanitation workers in 1969. That's not that long ago. It really is incredible to think how far we have come as a state in so little time. I guess empathy requires time. And spending government money will always carry a risk of corruption. You can look at the events of the firing of Cyrus Avery, the father of Route 66, the bribery scandal of Governor David Hall in the 1970s, the county commissioner scandal of the 1980s, which touched 66 out of Oklahoma's 77 counties and led to 246 federal convictions. It's easy for abuse to occur when the public isn't paying attention. Oklahoma's consolidation of political power in one party, regardless of whether it's a Democratic Party or Republican Party, makes it all the more easy for corruption and backdoor dealings to occur. During Operation Iraqi Freedom, the United States invasion of Iraq officially resulted in 3,481 deaths. The invasion caused controversy at that time over going to war with the military you have instead of the one that you wish you had. Regardless, the troops needed safe armored vehicles, and so improvements were made and better machines were invented. Since 9/11, there have been over 30,000 military suicides. Our military is finally recognizing that top-down, heavy-handed bureaucracy is not the way to handle the situation. Our transportation bureaucracy is modeled after top-down military structure. After World War II, the U.S. began a radical, progressive task to create a new way of life, and highway engineering was central to that mission. Across the country, highway builders plowed roads through low-income neighborhoods and communities of color, splitting them in half and detaching them from the rest of the city. But the highway builders did successfully build an incredible highway system. Our military is slowly moving away from this heavy-handed approach. They're dropping the stigma about mental health. They're easing up on soldiers who are struggling, and they're seeking more localized, out of the military services to fill gaps in the needs of their soldiers. This bottom-up, personalized, messier approach is slowly starting to improve the rate of suicide. State departments of transportation and state bureaucracies in general are in need of similar reform. Property-owning, tax-paying constituents are not pariahs. They are participants in the planning process of the places where they have made memories and raised families. The ad valorem property taxes your constituents pay fund the schools where the people of Norman send their children. We can't logically replace those ad valorem taxes with concrete. There's no one person and there's no one political party that's to blame here. The problem is the revolving door, the wheel that won't stop turning, where the governor can do whatever they want, whether it's Mary Fallon or who we have now, doesn't matter. And heavy-handed bureaucracy is the biggest problem we have here. I really hope that we can all work together and we can create a state and a government that we would be honored to send our children to war to fight for. I've personally experienced some of the worst tornadoes in our state's history. That kid, the third one from the right, that was my baby cousin. He's like 22 there. When the people who are opposed to this turnpike refer to themselves as in the path, I can't help but think about this day. The state of Oklahoma and its people have shown tremendous resilience following tornadoes. People come together. Russell Westbrook came to the path in a wheelchair to show his support. And I'll never forget, on this day, climbing out of the storm shelter, and we went and peeked over the fence, and I'm not exaggerating, there were hundreds of first responders coming. Hundreds, within minutes. Red and blue lights. It was incredible to see how fast they got there. So if this state is going to keep putting the citizens through this, if you're going to keep taking property in the name of progress, then the people of Oklahoma should demand a better first response out of the Transportation Commission and ODOT and OTA. Instead of sending a bunch of blameless surveyors and self-serving real estate agents in, you should send therapists. The lack of empathy that I've seen in the last 9 months does more than just upset me. It scares me. Because in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., these are the conditions that cause individuals to feel that they have no alternative than to engage in violent rebellion to get attention. We can do better than this. And I'm not opposed to economic development. I'm not opposed to growth. I could tell you a few places and more where you could send your contractors and fix the roads. But we have to treat each other like we recognize that we're all the same. We all have the same heart beating. And I just hope that eventually we can have a little bit more empathy from Oklahoma's transportation. Thank you.
Any questions from the representative? Representative recognized. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Whitney, and the hard work you put in developing that presentation. So at this time, we are, usually in an interim study, one of the things, the format is we have an individual give their presentation and they're very well finished for the day, for the study. In this situation, I think that with the nature of what we're talking about, that it was imperative, in my opinion, and Chairman Johns agreed, that we needed to, there was a lot of the theme of this study was dealt around concerns with what the OTA is doing with this proposed turnpike. There's a lot of things, a lot of questions posed either in the form of statements or questions themselves that were for the most part directed to the OTA, And we feel it was incumbent on our part for the OTA to have an opportunity to address those concerns and maybe answer some of those questions. I'm not saying they'll satisfy everyone, they might not answer all the questions. There's a lot of information that's presented here today, so the format of this last part, Speaker Kelly will be to basically let him, to whatever capacity he would like to do, address any of the concerns that were brought forth today, and then at the end I have some more questions I'd like to ask, and obviously maybe some more of the community members. So this time, Joe, you're more than welcome to do your final presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, representatives. I hate being the last thing standing between the end of a Friday, but I do want, one thing that I didn't do yesterday that I'd like to do is introduce myself. I didn't really do that. I jumped straight into it. So for those that don't know me, I'm Joe E. Kelly. I'm the Deputy Director and Chief Engineer from the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority. I've been in that role for about 1.5 years now, having worked in transportation for about 21 years. I'm from McAllister originally, which I did state yesterday, having driven the Indian Nation Turnpike mostly for the early part of my life. In 2001, I began work for ODOT and worked on the Atoka Bypass in southeastern Oklahoma, and worked as a draftsman, as a surveyor, for the construction surveyor for the state. I've worked as a resident engineer and inspector on projects. The job I had previous to coming to the Turnpike Authority, I was the construction engineer for what's now called District 4, North Central Oklahoma for ODOT. In that role, I really stepped into planning and paying attention to what the future looks like for that region of Oklahoma, which includes the Oklahoma City metropolitan area down to 89th Street on the south side. And but in that role, I was able to talk with the southern districts and I-35 and really all the engineers that work at ODOT and now at the Turnpike Authority, which there are a lot of transportation engineers, from materials engineers and geotechs and traffic engineers to planning groups that ODOT and OTA both utilize, that really pay attention to the growth wherever that is in the state. And we are growing not only in the metropolitan areas, but in other areas faster as a percentage. You got to pay attention to percentages, but faster in some other areas even than in the metro area. So something that we've really been paying attention to. I came to work for the OTA to do the construction and manage that for the Driving Forward program, the most recent bond program, where I really got to deliver a large project quickly, and I think there's a lot of value in fast construction to be less impactful. As the commissioner stated earlier today, those are all the concerns that he has, are things that we want to and will work on. Commissioner has been, we've been not been able to get our schedules correct. We have had a few meetings that where the commissioner was invited. We were unable to meet at those. There will be additional opportunities in the future. A couple things that I would like to clarify. I've got obviously some of our staff between ODOT and OTA representatives that are here, and they're quick to critique some of the things that I say. I'd had a question that I was trying to answer yesterday, Representative Sterling, where you asked about some of the things that OTA provides, and I went down a path of talking about me understanding the hardships having moved just a few years ago and all the trips that it took. OTA did not pay for my move. I want to make sure to make that clear, and neither did ODOT, nobody else did. This was, I think that some of the staff thought that I didn't make that very clear. OTA does pay for the relocation. We help facilitate finding additional housing when that time comes. Anyway, I wanted to make sure and make that clear. I don't think that I did a good job of ending that yesterday. One thing that did happen yesterday is you heard from two attorneys that represent some individuals that are opposed to the new alignments in South Oklahoma City. Mr. Norman and Mr. LaBarth discussed in their presentations the legal argument and really represented their side of recent developments and some ongoing litigation. Representative, I agree with you that this, and we agree with you that this isn't the place to discuss and air litigation. The courts are. I do want to say that OTA has dedicated public servant employees, and they're doing nothing but the best that they can to serve the transportation needs of Oklahoma, of all of Oklahomans and those that travel here and travel through our great state. And that we do our very best to comply with all the laws and believe that will ultimately be what is reflected in the outcome of the pending legal claims. I'm not an attorney, so I'm going to stay out of some of the questions along those lines, particular to those cases. One thing that I think gets lost in this is that this is a 15-year long-range plan. The Turnpike Authority has not done something like this before. We do bond programs that are 5 or 6 years long. We announce what we're going to do, knowing that there may be future things that need to be worked on, and sometimes knowing that those things are not too far down the road. We make an announcement, we build that 5 years worth of work, and then wait for the next time or when things are right to make the next announcement. Secretary Gatz and I don't believe that that's transparent enough. And this 15-year long-range plan tells you everything we intend to build and intend to work on the Turnpike side, and improvements that we can make and help with for the ODOT side, the tax-supported side of Oklahoma's transportation plan, through a long-range plan. A lot of the issues that folks have brought up here in the last 2 days are the exact reason that we've announced a long-range plan, so that we can work through and address some of the concerns that have been talked about. There are no free roads in Oklahoma. You know, whether we're building a turnpike or if somehow ODOT is brought in to build some portion of this, you know, it's a road either way. I know some people talked about that the turnpikes are more expensive to build than ODOT roads, and that's just not true. We pay the same consultants to design it. Those costs are the same. The right-of-way costs are about the same, or are the same, and construction costs are exactly parallel. Actually, ODOT advertises our projects, our construction contracts, and we award those at a Turnpike Authority board meeting, but the spec book that we use is the same, the specifications, all of those things are identical, so there's really no difference there. It's really just about the funding mechanism that pay for those, and whether the state of Oklahoma wants to further support transportation through increased funding through ODOT, or a pay-as-you-go method where the user pays for the service that they gain through a toll facility. OTA roads, and one of the presentations talked about some of the necessity or unnecessary roads that the Turnpike Authority has, and there are some that ODOT has that don't carry a lot of traffic. I will tell you that if you ask somebody from, I'll go back to the Indian Nation because I'm familiar with it, but if you ask somebody from McAllister or Antlers or Hugo if that connection is vital and necessary, they would tell you absolutely yes. Do they like to pay for it? Nobody likes paying their utility bills. But the need for the routes and that Oklahoma and that the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority have built have been there. The need is still there for the routes that we're talking about here today. And it's important, I think, to recognize that that these routes aren't going to resolve the issues that I-35 has. They just give an opportunity for people who are wanting to travel from the south, north and east, or from the north, south. And it's just another alternative. I know there was a major accident. I was made aware not long after I got to work this morning that there was a major accident on northbound I-35 today on the south side of the city, which backed up traffic significantly. And I get those emails, and I don't wish that anybody get the emails for fatality accidents or for when there's major issues on the highway network. Because when I get an email that says that we've closed the lane on the Turner Turnpike, or that the Turner Turnpike has to be closed for a few hours, I realize that is impacting thousands of people. And it impacts thousands of people in a matter of a few minutes. Not only the people who were stuck in that traffic, but the people they were going to see or to meet, or the airplane they were going to ride on, whatever the case is. So I don't wish that anybody else get those emails from around the state, but when I do, it really reinforces the need to widen the Turner and make some of those safety improvements, and as well as try to provide some assistance to the south side and to the traffic that's being seen on I-35. One of the things that I think we've identified is that there's been some misunderstanding with our quarterly bondholders statement that we provide. The information that is within that, I know that, I think that some of the information shown in other presentations is based off of that. That quarterly report is based on a quarter of the year of traffic. And so if you take whatever the traffic volume is or the number of transactions that occurred in that quarterly report and then divide it by 365 days out of the year, you're going to see a number that's significantly less than the quarter of the year that it actually represents, the 90 or so days. So that's one of the things that I wanted to touch on. There's been a lot of discussion about some mismanagement at the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority, and I will tell you that gets covered pretty heavily in an investment grade bond rating. We wouldn't be AA minus if we were as awful as some of the presentations have said that we were. An investment grade bond rating and that investment study that is done is very significant, and we have to do that before the traffic and revenue study that has to be done for a bond sale is done at the time of the bond sale. It's not done years in advance. We do traffic studies through ODOT, through ACOG for needs. We don't do that investment or that traffic and revenue study until closer, because we need to predict those revenues. You may recall that the Kickapoo, the traffic volumes on it have been criticized. I'll tell you, it's performing better than we expected as we got closer to the opening, because it followed a pandemic. The traffic predictions that were done for that roadway were done in 2016 and 2017, and had no idea there was going to be a pandemic in 2020 that would impact the traffic into 2021 when that roadway was open. Another thing to consider is that it was not fully open on the very first day. It was only partially open, and a few months later we opened the south end, and even then not all the lanes were open as we were finishing construction, but we were trying to get a roadway open to facilitate an alternative to I-35 and to provide access for the folks that inherit McLeod and Choctaw and Jones. So at the OTA we take and in transportation in general, I'll speak for ODOT and OTA briefly, but we have an all of the above approach to these alignments. Nothing that we are doing in the design phase restricts future rail lines, future expansion that ODOT may want to do to I-35. Nothing that we're doing restricts that. As a matter of fact, it may provide an alternative so that in the event ODOT needs to close a lane on I-35 to do some work, there'll be a safe alternative for traffic someday in the future. And I'll quickly wrap this up, but this is a 15-year long-range plan. the question about, I'm thinking about purchasing property and I'm 20 years away, what do you think? Well, this is the reason that we're announcing this plan, so that the decisions like that about people's farms and people's property that may be affected can at least have some amount of certainty, and that's the reason that we're working hard to get to that. So a 15-year long-range plan, a commitment from a couple state agencies here that we're going to work on this and work to do it right between now and 15 years from now. That was the things I wanted to cover. I'm happy to try to answer any questions. And there was a lot yesterday, so I'm sure there are a few. So,
Representatives, any questions? Representative Crosswhite, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. E. Kelly, when we talk about AOGC or Association of Central Oklahoma Governments, I can tell you that my husband and myself are 2 of 4 that participated in a whole community open meeting, 4 out of all the communities in the metro area. So I know a lot of those are not well attended. I'm curious from you, 2 different things. One, are they beneficial to you? And then, and not just AOGC, but all the COGs, with working. And then 2, it was told yesterday that you guys did not participate. So can you give me both sides of that?
Thank you for the question, Representative. The answer to that is we would participate if we had this plan announced. Obviously, we'll be involved in AOGC's planning the next time that comes around. I met with AOGC early on in this process, right, I don't remember the date, but somewhere around February 22nd. I don't remember if it was immediately before or immediately after. I met with AOGC, the director, and in my office, and went through what the plan was, and he said, "Oh, this is going to change. Wish we'd had this earlier this last year." The announcement hadn't been made. I understand that some folks are frustrated about the day that they found out about it. We all, the public, yourself, and our board, all found out about it at the exact same time, and that was the reason for the website that was put together and our efforts. So we've met with AOGC, and we will do that in the future. The program wasn't announced at the time that the discussions were going on last year.
Let me ask it a different way again. I know that they habitually have regular meetings for all kinds of things. Does OTA participate, not just on this project, but just as a regular routine maintenance that have some staffer that attends those meetings, and are those beneficial if they do?
Yes, we don't attend all the meetings. I receive regular invites to NCOG and AOGC, and we send representation. We typically take a look at what's on the agenda for the meeting and decide if we're going to send somebody there.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Then also, it was mentioned several times today and yesterday about how a turnpike going in hurts the economy of an area. Does OTA, or do you know of studies that follow up after a turnpike is built on what they do? Because I spoke about the area that I represent, which has been the largest growing, you mentioned it yesterday, was growing at 10% a year. So I understand what the possibility a road is difficult, slows up society around it while it's being built, but then many times they flourish after. Is there a study of some kind, whether it's OTA or are you aware of someone else that does some kind of study showing the follow-up, say 5 years, 10 years later down the road?
Thank you for that question. The OTA has not performed one of those studies in recent times. If we did perform one, it wouldn't be looked on very good. It looked like it was self-serving. It looked like we had a paddle on our own back. So that is not something that I'm necessarily interested in doing from the OTA side. But there are groups that have done those in the past, specifically along with John Kilpatrick. I believe that the state chamber has looked at some of those.
Okay. All right. I think that's sufficient. Thank you.
Any other questions, Representative Sterling?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and if you will allow me some latitude here. I do have several, because I didn't get a chance throughout the presentation, didn't want to interrupt. And the other two reps here would like to jump in. I can step back and finish up at the end too, so do not want to dominate. Okay, these are going to be in just different areas. I'm not going down rabbit holes or anything, but one of the things that was provided to me, so I don't know what the accuracy is on this. This was supposed to be a fact, and I'm just going with what was presented to me. States, I'll just read, historically OTA toll roads achieve on an average less than 63% of projected revenues, with some turnpikes legs faring much worse. Today, the Chickasaw Turnpike has garnered less than 24% of its projected revenues. So could you please just discuss some of some of these turnpikes that are underperforming from a revenue projection standpoint?
Yes, sir, Representative, thank you. I think what gets quoted there is from back in the late 80s and early 90s, when the traffic and revenue projections were done a little differently than they are today. One thing that we're able to do today that's different than back then has to do with that cell phone. I can get mine out fast enough, but it has to do with your cell phone, and that we're able to, utilizing, software, we can determine somebody coming that's driving past Purcell, where are they going, and with pretty good accuracy, and determine percentages of traffic like that. Since the 2000s, our traffic and revenue projections have been pretty darn close. Matter of fact, I think in most cases, aside from pandemic-related numbers, we've either met or exceeded it most of the time. That operations report that you were provided shows the CDM projections. You'll notice that month to month, sometimes the prediction is a little bit higher than what the traffic was. A lot of times the traffic is a little bit higher than what the prediction was. So we're doing a lot better job now than we were in the 80s and 90s, and I attribute that to the technology that's available for us for not us, but for our third-party traffic and revenue consultants to utilize to predict that traffic.
So, can you, I guess I would say, would you agree that you can understand the concern that some people have about apparently there's not as much traffic that was anticipated to be utilized in some of these turnpikes?
Yeah, I can understand that from that 80s and 90s perspective, but if you look at the Kickapoo and the John Kilpatrick extension, the two roads that are the most recent that we've opened up, and look at the traffic that was predicted on them by CDM Smith and the revenue that was predicted on them, we're either meeting or exceeding those predictions.
Okay, and this, you probably won't have the information at hand on this question. This is one I kind of formulated in my mind, which is scary. I'm curious about the total number of miles each, and you can provide this to me later if possible. Like I say, I just want to put it out there right now, but the total number of miles each turnpike has, I don't know how many total length, distance, and the daily number of vehicles that travel those. I would, if it's possible, I'd like to have maybe know the number of vehicles per mile on the average. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm trying to say, but if that's possible. Like I said, I don't need that today, but that's something I would definitely like to have a look at.
I have a couple of totals that are going to be rounded here, but the OTA has about 630 centerline miles of roadway currently today. And we're going to have, depending on the day, somewhere between 700 and 800,000 truck commuters a day on the average. Fridays today being a Friday, however the weather being a little bit rainy is going to slow that down, but on Fridays are our biggest day. It's probably well over 1 million on Fridays. That operations report shows the number of transactions by turnpike for the month. We have several turnpikes that exceed 100 miles or around 100 miles long, and then a few shorter ones that are significantly shorter, but I'll give you the...
Yes, and I have that individual in turnpikes.
Yeah, I
that
can
would
do
be
that.
great. Another question I had along the same line with revenue projections, etc. Just curious why the OTA built these toll collection stations and on the new, especially the new constructed turnpikes, and then we close them down, not utilize them, because to me, just perception, that's a heck of a lot of waste of taxpayers' money.
Well, toll payers,
Okay,
yes, sir.
correct. I was going to correct you on that.
That's a good question. The reality of that is a little bit of bureaucracy. When those toll roads were announced and when the studies were being done in 2015 into 2016, we were not attacking all electronic tolling at that time. So the way those projects were announced and to be built for the bond money that was collected to build those was that we were going to collect cash. Nearing the end of that, we designed them in such a fashion that we did the least amount of work that we could, because we knew it wasn't going to be very long. So if you look at the Kickapoo and the south end of the John Kilpatrick, it's less waste aside from the mainline toll plaza that's on the both the John Kilpatrick extension and the Kickapoo that's right just north of Britton Road. There is some waste there, and we're using that. We're reusing all the equipment. Any equipment that was there, Pike Pass readers, all those kind of things are being taken down and reused or put back in inventory for future maintenance. So it's less waste than you might think, but nonetheless, there was some waste there. We are surplusing those toll booths and the coin machines at this time, and working on recovering some of that money from that.
And here's a thing, we're almost still on the subject of collecting tolls. And this information was provided to me by some other representatives that had this question, whether or not we would address it. On the plate pay, again, this is anecdotal, I don't know how accurate this is, it's just provided from other ones that they say there's a lot of the paper tags and some of the tribal tags that aren't being charged when they go through the Pike Pass.
So there are lots of reasons that somebody wouldn't be charged. A dirty license plate, a blocked license plate, there are things that happen. Paper plates right now in Oklahoma are a challenge. I think Texas has worked on a solution to fix that in their state, which might be something we'd like to look at here in Oklahoma. At any rate, there is some loss of revenue because of that. There are some users that are going to be able to use the facility that OTA is unable to look up and send a bill to because of one of those reasons. That is a known quantity that we're a known quantity on the ones that we've already converted. We don't know exactly what that percentage or number is until the conversions are done to plate pay. But what I'll say about that is, from an engineering perspective, the enhancement to safety is 100% worth it. We're going to miss out on a little bit of revenue, but we're going to save hundreds of accidents, probably hundreds of accidents a year. And so, the absolute best way to collect revenue or from somebody is to make you pay before you get on or make you pay before you get off. And that's no longer convenient to the travelers, and it's not safe with the advent of Pike Pass and toll tags. I still encourage everybody to get a toll tag. It's the cheapest way for us to operate. The money savings that we have from somebody using a toll tag like Pike Pass is that we're able to pass that along to the customer in a reduced toll rate, and it really keeps our operating expenses low.
Thank you on that, but tribal tags.
Oh, yes, sir. There are tribal tags where there's a difficulty in looking up who the registered owner is. Some tribes register their tags through the Oklahoma Tax Commission, which is where we do the tag lookup. There are numerous tagged tribes in Oklahoma, so some of those are a challenge. We are working on that.
Yes, would you be surprised that I've had several reach out to me after this saying that are eligible for tribal tags will be getting them because of that, so just FYI on One thing that we had a conversation early when this whole projected turnpike became knowledge to everybody. We talked about the rights and options that land and property owners have once their property and homes, etc., have been purchased by the state. Example, remaining in their homes until the beginning of construction, moving costs, etc. In my office, we talked about that. Could you speak to that to the group, explain that a little more in detail?
Yes, sir. It goes back to that 15-year long-range plan and the perspective around that. The advantage to that to affected property owners is that if they're interested, and today we've had a couple hundred people who've reached out to us on the southern routes and said, hey, I just want to make sure you have my right name and my phone number to get a hold of me, but whenever you're ready to purchase, here's how you get a hold of me. And I'm ready whenever you are to sell. And sometimes that's vacant land, similar to oil field work. We've had, of those that have reached out to us, there have been, I believe, 8 that had a unique circumstance where they were either building a house, the property was for sale, and now they didn't think they were going to be able to sell it, and we were relatively certain, and so we were putting an undue hardship on somebody who was, halfway through building a house or maybe poured a slab. In those very unique circumstances, which there were 8 of them, we've pursued acquisition, went ahead and just getting that taken care of. Of those that we have done, I believe all of them, maybe not all of them, have signed a 1-year occupancy. We're not building anything, we're not moving any utilities at this time. We don't need access necessarily to the property, just trying to get them out of the hardship. Some of them have asked for an occupancy agreement, and we allow, we do them in 1-year terms, and then we can extend it in shorter windows after that if we need to. An example of that, which I would like to reference, was on the Kickapoo. We had several locations where people owned a long 20 acres, and their house was up on the front, on the road, and then, and then behind them they had their barns and their pasture. And due to the alignment of the Kickapoo Turnpike, they were severed from their back 10 acres or something. So we needed 2 or 3 acres, and then they were severed from the back because it impacted their farm, because it impacted their ranch. We negotiated to a total take. So we bought the whole 20 acres, even though we only needed a few. We signed occupancy agreements for some of those folks, and they stayed in the homes. They said, we'll stay here for a year, hold on to the money, and find our next place. What has happened most of the time, if not all of the time, is that within a few months they have found their next place, and gives them the flexibility to be able to look for that. We stay in contact with those folks, and so that when they vacate the house, we want to get in there and either get it removed if we can, or we've had some instances where we utilized smaller acre property that still has a home on it as in a property swap with somebody else that we needed more property from. We're not in the investment and development business of property, so as soon as construction is over, just like the John Kilpatrick extension and this spring, the Kickapoo, we sold the surplus, which were those little remainder 10 acres. Sometimes we bundled those together and turned them into a larger piece of property. That auction was done through a private auction company. It was well advertised, had a couple of rooms full and people online bidding on it, and we were able to put that property back on the tax rolls in Oklahoma County in that instance. So there's lots of flexibility in a long-range plan that you don't have in a shorter term plan. So, one of the things that we've talked about on these south alignments is that we're really focused on the connection between I-44 and I-35. And the good thing about that is it has significantly less homes on it in that alignment. I don't think there's really but maybe 2 or 3, and a couple of businesses. So that's the place where we want to start. We'll be able to provide additional flexibility to everybody east of I-35, and the further you go into this phasing, the more flexibility there is. Again, as of today, OTA has not reached out and told anybody that their property was impacted because we have not established the alignments. We've established a study area, and that's what's on our website, and that's what we're trying to stay within. And we're doing, I think we're going to do a pretty good job of that in most cases. There are a couple instances where ramps or where, you know, just the geometry of the existing roadways, you know, is going to push outside of that. But it's not because it's pushing out on both sides. It's only pushing out someplace on a little edge, and then, you know, we're drawing the property in, or that orange line will be drawn in on the other side. Those maps will get updated this next year, and that'll be a lot better useful information to anticipate what OTA is going to do next for the public anyway.
So along those lines, you heard today and previously at other times, the two ladies that had one of the staying community, I think, had the alpacas. I'm not sure what the animal was. The dairy farmer, you know, that's trying, and I definitely grew up in a dairy farm, so I understand you have to you know as well in your other life as a farmer, that it takes a lot of resources, a lot of land to make that happen. So if they're wanting to stay in those arenas of their interest, if they wanting to stay in this area, they want to stay in the metro area, their family. I know one of the speakers talked about they were going to stay, I think it was the last speaker said, they're going to stay close to their family. You know, they just are very tied to those folks. So obviously there's some concerns for people to be able to relocate to other areas in proximity to the area they live now. From what we're hearing, again, anecdotally, is that there's not even swap cars. If it says 200 homes, there's not 200 homes available. Again, that's anecdotal. Could you address those concerns or just speak to that briefly?
Yes, sir. Again, the best part of a long-range plan is it allows us to really spread this out over a longer period of time if the property owners so choose. If the property owners if we determine next year and narrow down our need and are able to establish it, and everybody wants everybody, which is not going to happen, but if everybody wanted to be purchased, then that's the route we would go, and we would try to help folks with that. When we purchase property, we don't just buy it and kick people off. That's not how this works. We, especially in I believe the farm that was talked about were some elderly folks, and especially those folks that need help or maybe need guidance in finding the next property, or guidance or help moving. You know, again, we pay for all of those things, and we help them to try to find a good realtor, and we try to work with them early so that, you know, they have the flexibility to not be in a rush, and hopefully they're able to find that next property that serves their needs either as well or better than their current setup. There's always room for improvement. Another thing that we're doing, we're partnering with, you know, I absolutely hated during driving forward during the last bond program when we would have to tear down a house, especially if the house was new, you know, and had a lot that was or recently remodeled, you know. Hated that. We are partnered with Habitat for Humanity on this go-around, so we're going to provide them with notification before anything's torn down, whether that's a house or a barn or a metal building, and if they're able to come in and salvage from that something that's usable for somebody else, then we're going to try to facilitate that this time. And I think that's, you know, that's really one of the better aspects of having the ability to plan a little bit further in advance.
Thank you for that. These last final questions are going to take just a little bit of a different direction. Also, you know, there was, again, I'm reading from some information that's provided to me. Project alteration has been the responsibility of lead. This was supposedly actually from the OTA made this comment. Project authorization has been the responsibility of the legislature, and the challenges, finer details of route selection, timing, specifics of information have been the responsibility of the OTA, excuse me. And it says this methodology has withstood the test of time and has yielded favorable results. I'm not sure about that. I really question that, I really do. Some of the legislators, I'm not speaking for all legislators, obviously feel like they're saying, so they want us to give them money and for us to stand out of the way. Is there a fear of us as legislators being involved in this more?
No, sir, there's no fear of the legislature being involved more. The concerns that came up on legislation, for instance, that was discussed and run this and authored this last session had to do with the uncertainty that it created around the projects. We can't undertake the amount of money that it takes. We can't undertake all of the studies that need to take place without having some amount of certainty that it can be built. So when you add, when legislation creates a lot of uncertainty, it degrades the bond rating, increases our interest rate, which eventually has to be passed on in the toll rate. So the way it is currently set up, the legislature authorizes those 35 different either turnpikes, and in some cases in those 35 listings there's gates and other things, and interchanges, but authorizes the routes in general in the state, and as you just stated, it's up to the OTA to determine when it's feasible, when we can get our arms around it, if it's necessary. A lot of the routes that are in statute, ODOT has already built or constructed. They've already built a 4-lane facility. We're not going to go build one parallel to it. That doesn't make any sense. But you know, the ones that aren't built, forever's a long time. You know, maybe some of those, maybe they're not needed. Maybe they'll never be needed. But you know, that's the responsibility of the legislature. Tell us, you know, what you're thinking on a future route that needs to be built, that may need to be built, and then it's up to OTA to study that. In the past, as in the 80s and 90s, when routes were added in statute, the Turnpike Authority went and did a feasibility study pretty quick, which estimated what the cost was going to be. At that time, it was more than we could get our arms around, or else we'd have built the whole thing. I saw a newspaper article, and I think it's on our, it may be listed on our timeline, where it was from 1992 or 93, whatever the year was that the first leg of the Kilpatrick was opened. And it was on the front page of the Daily Oklahoman. It said this is the first leg of a future outer loop that's going to go all the way around Oklahoma City down to, and I think it even listed off Mustang and Moore and Norman and Luther and Choctaw. I mean, it listed where the route was going to go back then. And you know, the Turnpike Authority just couldn't bite that whole thing off, nor was there an appetite to increase the, I mean, we could go build something if it's necessary and if it'll carry traffic, but the toll rate would be very high to do that much construction all at one time. There are a lot of factors that we're weighing with a plan that's this big, and with ODOT getting additional funding from the additional funding. And they've recently got fourth quarter money, something to the tune of just under $200 million additional dollars. You know, so there's an entire industry that we have to pay attention to. Not only the engineering side, the surveyors. You know, we're tapping all the surveyors in Oklahoma. And the construction side. There's just there's only so much, you know, work that can be done here in our state, and so we have to spread some of that out just to stay within bounds of, and not drive the price of construction or the price of some of these things up. So all factors that we're paying attention to.
Okay, my final direction that I want to go is talking about the OTA board makeup. Currently, there's no legislative input on that. You can see any reason why there should not be?
Any reason I struggle to answer that question, Representative. The way the OTA board members are selected is really up to the up to the governor and up to the Senate. They have to be Senate confirmed. They're carried through the Senate Transportation Subcommittee for confirmation and then approved on the, confirmed on the Senate floor. So the legislature, I think, is involved to a degree. I've been to some of those. They are questioned sometimes pretty heavily about their knowledge of transportation. We have had historically, the board members that I know, both at OTA and the commissioners that I've been around and aware of at ODOT, have varying backgrounds, usually in some way or another represent both attorneys to bankers to trucking and other, some of them are private business folks, some of them are formerly elected officials. We've had all kinds on both the Transportation Commission and the OTA board.
Okay, I have some final comments, but I just want to check with the chair, make sure to see if the other reps might have some questions before I do those.
I don't see any other questions. I just want to make my final statement is I really appreciate Representative Sterling, your interim study. It's been really good. It's given us a lot to look at, a lot of things to chew on, and I appreciate everybody's input. Mr. Elo, I appreciate you being here at the beginning, and I appreciate you being at the end to address. Obviously, that's something you did not have to do, but we appreciate you giving up your time. And Secretary Gatz, appreciate you being here and other staff members being here to listen and to take in the information, so we appreciate you guys as well. With that, Representative Sterling, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I believe we need to, just some final comments here. I feel like we maybe need to measure the original intent of the statute against what is being done today. Just because it's always been done this way in the past doesn't necessarily make it right, in my opinion. That is one reason why we have a mandatory language here at the Capitol that is applied where needed and during our legislative sessions. As the pending lawsuits are resolved, hopefully that will provide some clarity and direction for us as legislators as well. We have been provided many personal stories today and yesterday, and by everyone in this study. Now we as legislators, in my opinion, are tasked with the task of examining all the information that has been provided to us and determining what potential legislation might need to be generated moving forward, if any. I want to thank everyone who has had a part in this study, especially the House staff. Appreciate they always are bailing us out, but me especially, trust me. The sergeants, great people to work with. Definitely want to thank my legislative assistant, Annie. She has done a lot of work making me good. She's a great young lady. And I definitely want to thank Chairman Johns for just allowing the study to be presented in his committee today. So again, thank you for everybody. I think it's been very informative, and not all that questions were answered and all concerns addressed, but I think maybe, hopefully some have been, and we will take this information and move forward from there. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We're adjourned.